In the novel You Are Here by Karin Lin-Greenberg, a once bustling mall is about to shut its doors for the last time. For decades, it's held a community of residents from a small upstate New York town who cut their hair at Sunshine Clips, or had a bite at Chickadee Chicks in the food court, or stopped at the Book Nook to browse the latest bestsellers. Now, word is out that the mall will shutter. Those who spend every day at the mall, working, shopping, mall walking, dread the closing day. A shocking act forces them to face the inevitable closure and the ways they live their lives. This is Book Public from Texas Public Radio. I'm Yvette Benavides. I spoke to author Karin Lin-Greenberg about her novel, You Are Here. This novel, You Are Here, takes place mostly in a mall, in the Greenways Mall. And I was thinking about how much a setting like this can be just this like self-contained community
Mhm.
um, with people who see each other all the time. I've worked in a mall before when I was much, much younger.
Oh, yeah.
And you see the same people all the time. So tell me about this setting. Tell me where you got this idea for this setting.
Yeah, I mean, exactly what you said. I was seeing it as just such a setting that was just had a lot of potential for bringing people together and creating a community that I think is maybe a little different from most of the types of communities we might encounter in our day-to-day lives, because it brings together people who are very different from different backgrounds, maybe different ages, who are there for different reasons. Because I think about a lot of, communities where, thinking about like a workplace, well, there oftentimes people who are engaged in the same type of work who are gathering there. Whereas at a mall, yeah, it's a workplace, but there are, all sorts of people coming from for different reasons. I have in this novel a couple of characters who work at the mall, but then there's also, a woman who's 89 years old who comes there for companionship. And that's not at all the reason anyone else, comes. Another character is 9 years old, and he comes because, his mom really can't afford to hire a babysitter. And so he comes, and she's a stylist in the mall salon, and he sits there and does his homework. And then he ends up encountering the woman who's 89, and they become pretty fond of each other. And that was a relationship I was thinking, might not have happened outside of that space. So yeah, I just saw it as a place with a lot of potential for bringing all sorts of characters together.
I just love it. And the opening chapter takes place at Sunshine Clips and inside this mall. I think any person who's ever had their haircut in a mall would
Yeah,
recognize this space and all the
yeah.
different sort of accoutrements of a mall beauty shop. I just love it. How did the space come to inspire your there was a story, it's the first chapter of the novel titled Sweeper of Hair, which I mean on its own, I think it's just like this marvelous story to begin with. But tell me
Thank
where
you.
Sweeper of Hair came from.
Yeah, I mean, so I have had my hair cut in a mall before. I've found that, for a while I was like moving for jobs, and I just always felt like, okay, a mall, like just let's just go get your hair cut at the mall. Like I don't know, it's probably not true, but I thought, well, it's you're sort of on display there in a way that you might not be at a salon that's like tucked back on a street. So, nothing too bad can happen, right? If you're just like choosing, somebody off of Yelp. And so yeah, so I was just like, all right. So I, kind of had that space in my head, but I was actually getting my hair cut, not at a mall salon, but I was getting my hair cut. And I was having a conversation with the woman who was cutting my hair, and she was talking to me about scissor sharpeners, people who used to come and go kind of door to door, go to salons, and they would sharpen the scissors right there. And she was saying that, that's just not a line of work that people do anymore. And so now you have to send your scissors back to the company that you bought them from to get them sharpened. And she was talking about her scissors came from Japan, and so she'd have to send them to Japan, and they'd be sharpened there, and then be sent back. And so I was just getting my hair cut, and I was just thinking about this idea of just like endings and things that don't exist anymore. And then I just started thinking about malls too. And so that's why I set that first story in that mall salon, because I thought, kind of symbolize this idea of the dying mall, just something that was once vibrant and lots of people went to, and just how it's changed so much. When I was writing the first draft of this, I was really thinking of e-commerce a lot, and how that has shaped how we shop now. But then, since that first draft, there's obviously COVID, and also, keeping us away from some of these public places as well. So yeah, I mean, just really started with that story that the woman who was cutting my hair told me, and then thinking about endings in a place that maybe kind of symbolizes that.
I just love this idea, and it does run through the novel about things that end, things that are replaced or displaced.
Yeah.
There's this very young YouTube influencer, this young kid that gets under the skin of another character named Tina, who I really want to ask you about, almost as if this younger kid who's an artist could somehow replace Tina, who had these aspirations for a long time to be an artist, and then she ends up working at Sunshine Clips, cutting hair. This idea, and we see it also with the 89-year-old woman, Ro, the idea of things that are replaced, objects that are replaced, or I would say also the mall, the idea of a mall, I think has really changed a lot. I don't know if people can discern it if they, if they go to a mall all the time, but malls are
Mhm.
very different, I think, than they used to be. But the idea of the scissor sharpener, also, I was stunned by, in very pleasant ways, by this idea of the character explaining to Jackson that she has to send her scissors back to the company. It's just, it almost seems like a lost art or something. It was just such an interesting detail to me. And so you learned
Yeah.
that while you were getting your haircut. And so this makes me think, as you're saying this, that stories are everywhere. And you have to be open to them. But I'm hearing this from you now that you're just sort of a collector of stories.
Yeah.
People, I love it.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. And I mean, I think if that's one of the nice things about working on a novel, if you hear something and it's interesting, you can figure out, how can you maybe fit this into the novel, and so there's plenty of things like that were just things that I encountered, on TV, on the radio, or just seeing something in life, or hearing something that I thought, how might this intersect with one of the characters? And so, an example of that is just, tiny houses. The one of the characters who works in the mall, who is the manager of the bookstore, he built a tiny house for his family. And that was just something that, like, I kept seeing cropping up, like, on social media, on TV. And I was just like, what would it be like to live in this house that's like 300 square feet? It's like the size of a room, and, in a bigger house. And what conflicts can come out of this particular space. And also, like, can this object, this house, kind of symbolize like regret? You build it, and then you have to live in it, right? So yeah, with him. And then also, I was just, reading about, I just saw something online about border collies, and that's also that same character who's living in a tiny house, and he's kind of trying to figure out what he wants to do with his life. And he cooks up this idea of a goose chasing business, and with border collies chasing geese away from, like, basically grassy areas like college campuses, or golf courses, or cemeteries, places like that. And that was just something I just saw on the internet one day. I saw, oh, this is a business, and, like, who would want to do this business? And, how would you do this business? So yeah, I mean, I think just kind of seeing things, and just, yeah, and they end up filtering into my fiction.
Kevin is the character who's the manager of the bookstore and builds the tiny house. He's ABD. He's all but dissertation. He's maybe not going to finish. We don't know, but he's
Yeah.
married to Gwen, and they have these twins, and then they have a dog. So I think about that tiny house in Joan's backyard. And you're right, it is sort of like you build a house, you have to live in it. And it's the source of a little bit of conflict, certainly from the character of Ro. This idea of finding stories, the border collie story and so on. I'm wondering now about the idea of magic. So Jackson is the 9-year-old boy, he's the son of Tina. He loves magic. And I was thinking about the idea again of displacement or replacement, and his interest in this aging magician named Larry, who
Mhm.
has these events where he doesn't really do magic anymore, but he gives away the secrets of
Yeah.
magic tricks. And Jackson really wants to learn magic, which, as I'm reading, it seems like such a quaint little hobby, such a low tech kind of hobby for a young kid in contemporary
Mhm.
times. But then
Yeah.
Larry will soon be totally out of this business because of his Parkinson's. And it's interesting that this kind of old school magic, it's not a replacement or a displacement, but it's just sort of Jackson discovering it. I mean, it's not a Chris Angel, right? David Blaine kind
Yeah,
of
no,
magic.
no, it's interesting, right? Because that character, it was the magician character. It was based on a character when I was a kid. The sort of the coolest birthday parties in my town, we'd have this magician guy would come, and I think like looking back on it now, I think like was he like kind of a hack? Was he not great? But like we all thought he was amazing. And like one trick I remember, it was I think before dry erase boards were like in every classroom, right? When there's still chalkboards. And I remember this one trick where he had, I think it looked like sort of like an artist palette. And then like he'd write on it and then he'd run his hand across it and everything would disappear. And we were like, wow, but now like that was a dry erase board, I think, So yeah, I was thinking about that kind of stuff. And then I was also thinking about, there's all these, talent shows on TV. And I just, stumbled into some stuff just like Jackson does on YouTube, where basically anytime a magician does something on one of those talent shows on TV, someone will hop on the internet and say, well, this is how it's done. And I thought, like, that's sort of sad to me, right? Like, I spent many years being enthralled by this guy who had these tricks that were not great tricks. And, we had no idea how he did them and we were so excited by them. And then now everything, like even these like, amazing tricks that probably cost a ton of money to do. And, you need all these like techs working on them, like any of them, an hour after they appear on TV, somebody's like, well, this is how you do it, and to me, like that takes some of that magic out of some of the things. So yeah, I was thinking about that with that character where he is kind of able to like figure all these things out, but then, because he's 9, because he doesn't have money, because he's a kid, he can't do these, what he calls spectacular tricks. And so he's trying to figure out like, yeah, these like small, inexpensive tricks that he can do with just like everyday things.
Yeah. So, um, my brain is on fire. So I'm thinking about I'm thinking about your short story collection called Vanished, as you're
Mhm.
talking about the magician making things disappear. And then I'm thinking about how Ro in her really poignant, lovely relationship with Jackson. How do I say this without sounding totally corny? So she brings back cameras and
Mhm.
wristwatches and these things that are a little bit outdated for him to enjoy. I mean, Jackson wears the watch that belonged to Rose's husband, and he takes pictures with this old camera. I just
Yeah.
love this idea that that things reemerge too. That things don't just disappear and go out of date and are buried and forgotten, but that there's something happening too with this kind of appreciation of things. And I don't want to give too much away, but the idea of
Yeah.
developing the film from the camera and being able to see certain
Mhm.
things. I'll just say that much because that's such a gorgeous part of the
Yeah.
book.
Yeah, I mean, right. I mean, these are things like I would say like nothing in the book is autobiographical, but I think there are these like elements that are things that I think, how sad that we don't do that anymore. I mean, I remember, you shoot your rolls of film and then you go and you drop them off somewhere and you wait and you don't know. And, maybe out of the 24 photos, like 10 of them have like a finger over them, right? And they're terrible. And it takes like a week to find that out, whereas now you just so easy on your phone taking these pictures. And I thought there's something kind of lovely in that surprise of what you're going to get. Or even, I mean, like I don't wear, a wind up watch anymore. Like I have a smartwatch, but I think, it's so sad nobody's wearing watches anymore. And once in a while I'll see somebody wearing one and it just strikes me as just so strange and kind of beautiful that, oh, somebody actually has a watch on their wrist, And so yeah, like thinking about these things that have disappeared, for the not everywhere. People obviously still wear watches, people still take photos on film, but these things have been replaced in ways that are, easier or just quicker to access. And so I think that's one of the things I was thinking about a lot in this book. There are sort of some beautiful things that come out of maybe these more difficult ways of doing things, especially I was thinking about film photography.
Yeah, I love all of those sections of the book, and it makes me think about Rose. So Rose, this character, talk about, invisible people as a woman of a certain age. And she's sort of all alone in the world, although she doesn't necessarily have to be, but her life is complicated. I'll just put it that way,
Mhm.
just in terms of how she chooses to live and her personality. But she does go to this mall, and she gets her hair cut, and Tina cuts her hair, and they do forge a kind of a relationship, just a kind of a routine. And it's a very moving thing, and I know of, like, mall walkers and, people
Mhm.
who go to the mall and have a cup of coffee and wanna people watch and feel a part of things, and so I was thinking about that, but I was thinking about how sort of intrinsic Tina, who I sort of consider it's really hard to pick, like, the heart of the story, and everybody is so compelling to me in this novel, but there's
Thank
something
you.
special really about Tina too, that I find so interesting because of these aspirations that I was talking about, and she's a single mother of this little boy. She's so industrious, she's so hardworking, she's so compassionate too. So, I don't know, I feel like Tina in a way allows, for Ro, in the same way that Ro allows for these objects to reemerge in Jackson's life, and give them another life. I feel like Tina does that with Ro, and, Ro's complicated, right?
Yeah.
But
Right.
but Tina just seems very open to the idea of Ro.
Yeah, I mean, that was a relationship that I wanted to explore, and I don't even know if relationship is the right word because, Ro is a character who, has, I think, made a lot of mistakes in her life and kind of wants to right the wrongs of the past, but doesn't know how to. And she doesn't know how to connect to people. And she actually really likes Tina. She likes Tina as a person. She likes Tina's son, Jackson. She likes spending time with them, but she doesn't know how to move it beyond the relationship of going to get her hair styled every week. She doesn't need to get her hair styled every week. She's not going anywhere. She's mostly sitting at home being nosy, looking out her window. And so she, but she's going because it gives her, an hour or so to talk to Tina. I think these characters, one of the things I was thinking about that kind of connects them is that they all feel stuck in a certain way. And I think with Tina, she feels stuck, in the particular path she's taken down in life, and thinks about could she have done other things, but she can't. For practical reasons, she can't pursue a career as an artist because that's just not a career that has any certainty in terms of paychecks. And Ro is stuck on this path of really not knowing how to connect with people. And I think Tina is one of those people. And in the first chapter, there's already conversation about, this mall might be closing. And then not I don't think this gives too much away. By the second half of the book, it is established that the mall is for sure closing. I think Ro is the person, even though she's not depending on the mall for, her paycheck, she's depending on it for the most significant companionship, and so she's the one who's the most devastated by the mall closing because she doesn't know how to continue the relationship with Tina and Jackson. I mean, they live in the same town. She could say, like, hey, do you want to come over for dinner? But she just doesn't know how to do that. And so for her, it feels like an enormous loss because she's going to lose this connection that she's forged in this place and doesn't know how to move it beyond this place.
It's so poignant, it's so powerfully moving, and
Thank you.
I just love the structure of this novel, and I love that it's set up by month. September, starting in September and going through June, and it has these alternating points of view. And you also do this super interesting thing where we might learn about something from, say, Tina's point of view or Jackson's. And then in a later chapter, in a later month, it's reinforced or retold from the perspective of Maria, say, or Ro, or someone else. You come to another month, it's almost like ripping the month off the calendar, the paper calendar on the
Mm-hmm.
wall, and seeing
Mm-hmm.
what's coming up and who's telling the story and now what's going to happen. It's just kind of genius. I have to tell you that it just worked so beautifully.
I really appreciate hearing that. And basically, the structure was essentially how I, as somebody, who had spent many years writing short stories, kind of figured out how to get myself through a novel. I had tried to write a few novels in the past that I just kind of couldn't, like one of them, I just couldn't finish the narrative. The other one, I did finish it, but I felt like, not enough happened. And so, I told myself, okay, like you need to figure out how to write a novel as a story writer. And at first I was actually thinking of this as a linked story collection. But I think like by the time I got like maybe 3 or 4 stories into it, I realized, okay, it's actually maybe starting to move more towards a novel because things are dependent on knowing what happened, before. And the way I think, in some linked story collections, I think you can kind of just read a story independently, no matter where it is, and still, feel like you've gotten a complete narrative. But yeah, and so for me, it was okay, let's move through, the 10 months leading up to the mall's closing. And so that will push you forward in time at least. And then for me also, as somebody who's used to writing stories where, you write 20 pages or so in one character's perspective, then you can move on to another story, and have another character and explore the other character. For me, it was kind of the fun way to be able to sustain a narrative, but still kind of have some of the pleasures of story writing, of moving, from character to character. And I really appreciate what you said too about, seeing a character kind of externally from somebody else's perspective and then getting into their minds. Cause I think that's something that, in a typical maybe 20-page story that I wouldn't get, I think it's hard. I mean, you certainly can do it, but I think it's a little bit harder in a short story to switch perspectives. So to be able to say like, okay, here's, 20 pages of Roe looking at Kevin and thinking he's an idiot. And then like 50 pages later, we get into his mind and like, he does some things that are still, like, why is he doing those things? But then I think hopefully you understand him better and maybe he becomes a more sympathetic character by the time you get into his perspective. So yeah, I mean, definitely the structure was just the way to get me through writing it. So thank you for your comments on that, because that's really nice to hear how it, for you as a reader, how it worked.
Oh, it worked beautifully. I mean, I
Thank
hope
you.
people listening to this, if they haven't read your story collections, will chase them down and read them because
Thank
they're
you.
gorgeous, and you're such a great story writer.
Thank you.
But this you're a novelist. This novel, it works both
Thank you.
for different reasons. So the characters in this book, they seem to all want to change and grow. They all have
Mm,
interests in other things. I mean, even Kevin, who, we might see as somebody who, didn't reach his hasn't reached his goal. He's still creating other goals. And they're so interesting to me. And they ultimately have to adapt in order to keep in some way to their aspirations.
mhm,
And some of the characters, they're harboring secrets or secret goals like Tina that they have to wait a long time to give themselves permission to even talk about. And that's so human. And
mhm,
then some of the younger characters don't take quite so long. They don't wait, decades, we figure out. Um, and they show us that maybe aspirations are a little bit less about dreaming and more about action. Like this is something I love about
mhm,
Jackson and Maria too, and Annie for that matter. I look at them and I think like, yeah, like they're really into walking the walk, not just talking about
mhm.
it, but about action. Um, so, the idea of this is so interesting to me where things are shutting down, things are, sort of seemingly coming to an end. And instead there is all the sort of this living life, still this action and activity. And not to give too much away, everybody needs to read this book and see what happens, but with every single character in this book. And it's so real and but it's still so refreshing.
Yeah, no. I mean, I think what's interesting, right? This idea of characters having aspirations. Think, as you said, I think it's a really human thing. I find that I think because I'm a writer, I'll oftentimes have conversations with people, and I'll be really surprised when they say, "Well, I'm working on a novel too," and people who are, really successful in completely different careers, that have nothing to do with writing, and and so it always sort of amazes me to think like, oh yeah, everyone kind of has their secrets, right? Everyone has their secret aspirations, and everyone kind of even if they are doing well in what they're doing, I think kind of always dreams of something else, you know? And so that was one of the things that I was thinking about a lot. And just, but then also this idea that it's hard to be a lot of the things these characters want to be, right? You know, an artist, a magician, you know, even Kevin thinking about all these businesses that he wants to run. And so, you know, some of these characters are keeping these things secret because they're thinking, I don't want to talk about it until it happens. Whereas Kevin's the one character who does talk about everything. And then that creates a clash between him and Tina because she's harboring secrets about what she wants to be. And as is her son, because I think they're both characters who are like, well, let's see if it happens. If it happens, we talk about it. Whereas Kevin is always saying like, well, I have this idea and I have that idea. I'm going to raise bees. I'm going to, you know, have a tiny house building business. And so, yeah, I was thinking a lot about just kind of how people deal with their dreams. Do they talk about them? Do they hide them? And then can it cause tension between the characters in terms of, you know, how they let the world know or don't let the world know?
Karin Lin-Greenberg, thank you so much for talking to me today. What a thrill and what an honor to get to talk to you about You Are Here.
Thank you so much for talking to me. I really appreciate it.
Karin Lin-Greenberg is the author of the novel You Are Here. It's published by Counterpoint Press. This has been Book Public from Texas Public Radio. Write to us at bookpublic@tpr.org. Jacob Rosati composed our theme music. Dan Katz is Texas Public Radio's news director. I'm Yvette Benavides.